Imagine standing at the edge of a river wider than 15 city boulevards combined and watching it slowly, silently die. The Mekong is real, and it is changing faster than scientists can document. This river feeds 60 million people and produces more freshwater fish than all of Europe combined. What is happening to one of Earth's great rivers, and why should it matter to every one of us? To understand, we must follow this river to its beginning, a plateau in Tibet, where snowmelt falls from 5,000 meters above the sea. The Mekong is not simply a river, it is a living system more intricate than any tropical forest humanity has ever known. It begins as a modest trickle on the Tibetan Plateau, where thousands of years of accumulated snow begin their long descent. From 5,000 meters above sea level, water travels through 12 degrees of latitude, crossing 6 nations before it reaches the sea. Along 4,900 kilometers of river, it gathers red sediment, minerals, and life from every mountain it touches. That red silt is what built the Mekong Delta, 80,000 square kilometers of land that would not exist without it. For millions of years, that silt, settled like pages, added each year to an enormous book written by the Earth itself. And it nourishes one of the richest freshwater ecosystems on Earth, second only to the Amazon basin. More than 1,300 fish species have been recorded here, more than all the fish species of North America combined. Among them are species that have swum these waters since long before the first human being walked the Earth. These ancient creatures are not merely biological symbols, they are living gauges of an entire system's health. But to understand why this ecosystem is extraordinary, we must understand one thing the Mekong does every year that almost no other river on Earth can do. Every year, when the monsoon arrives, the Mekong does not merely rise, it reverses a tributary, forcing a lake to grow 6 times larger in just a few months. This reversal of the Tonle Sap is one of nature's most extraordinary events, and almost no one outside Southeast Asia has heard of it. During flood season, forests sink beneath 10 meters of water and fish swim into the treetops to spawn in the drowned canopy. This is what ecologists call the river's pulse, its annual breathing rhythm of advance and retreat that creates and sustains all life here. Without that pulse, there is no Tonle Sap Lake as it exists, no great fish harvest, no livelihood for tens of millions of Cambodians and Vietnamese. And it is precisely that pulse unchanged for millions of years that is now being broken for the very first time. To understand why, we must look at what is being built along those 4,900 kilometers of river. By 2025, more than 400 hydropower dams had been completed or were under construction along the Mekong's main stem and tributaries. Each dam traps sediment, holds back minerals, and dampens the flood pulse, quietly reshaping everything that lives downstream. Scientists first understood something was deeply wrong in 2019 when the Mekong fell to its lowest level in 100 years of recorded history. It was not drought. That year's monsoon had been normal. The dams upstream were simply holding the water back. Researchers at Eyes on Earth, an American science organization, analyzed satellite data and confirmed what local communities had long suspected. The landscape upstream was wetter than usual, but the river downstream was drier than it had ever been in living memory. That finding shifted how the world understood the Mekong crisis from a climate problem to a transnational water governance failure. But the deepest impact, the one almost no news report has fully told, is happening inside the river itself, among creatures most humans have never seen. This is where we must speak of the Mekong giant catfish, the largest freshwater fish on the face of the Earth. This fish can reach 3 meters in length and weigh 300 kilograms, roughly equal to a full-grown polar bear. And it eats no flesh at all. Adult Mekong giant catfish live entirely on algae and plankton, filtering the water like a vast living machine. It must migrate thousands of kilometers each year upstream from Cambodia all the way to Yunnan to reach its spawning grounds. Today, dams block that migration route entirely. No fish ladders, no bypass channels, only concrete. From tens of thousands of individuals at the start of the 20th century, the Mekong giant catfish population is now estimated at fewer than 1,000. In ecological terms, that number means a species has entered the corridor leading toward extinction. But the giant catfish is merely the most visible symptom of a far larger collapse already unfolding beneath the surface. Total fish catch from Tonle Sap Lake has fallen by more than 50% over the past 2 decades. For Cambodians, fish from Tonle Sap provides more than 70% of all the animal protein in their daily diet. This is not simply a story about nature. It is a story about food, about survival, about the daily meal on the table for tens of millions of people. And in the Mekong Delta, the story takes on another dimension entirely, one that almost nobody outside Vietnam fully understands. The Mekong Delta covers less than 12% of Vietnam's land area, yet produces more than 50% of the entire country's food supply. And that entire system, every grain of rice, every fish pond, every orchard depends on something that is now disappearing: sediment. Sediment is not merely mud. For a delta like the Mekong's, sediment is the only thing standing between the land and the sea. Under natural conditions, sediment from upstream extended the delta coastline by roughly 25 meters every single year. Today, that number has reversed. The delta is losing land at rates measured in tens of meters every year. This happens because dams upstream trap sediment. Scientists estimate between 50 and 75% of the Mekong's sediment now never reaches the delta. And when sediment does not arrive, land is not replenished. When land is not replenished while the sea rises, land subsides. Current projections from Mekong River Commission scientists suggest that by 2050, up to 1/3 of the Mekong Delta could lie beneath sea level. This is not science fiction. These are numbers derived from field measurements happening right now. But sediment loss is only one front. There is another threat advancing from the opposite direction, from the sea itself. Saltwater intrusion, seawater, advancing up the river channels, now penetrates more than 60 kilometers further inland than it did just 20 years ago. Saltwater does not merely kill rice, it permeates the soil and persists for years after the intrusion event has passed. Mekong Delta farmers once harvested 3 rice crops per year from the same land. Today, many can manage only 1 or none. This is what scientists call a negative feedback loop. Less sediment leads to subsidence. Subsidence leads to saltwater intrusion. Saltwater intrusion leads to lower productivity. And that loop spins faster with every dry season, every new dam, every centimeter of sea level rise. But the strangest part, the part even scientists did not fully anticipate, is that the river itself is responding in ways that are deeply unpredictable. When sediment is trapped behind dams, the water downstream becomes clearer and mineralogically starved. That mineral-starved water carries greater erosive energy. Instead of building the riverbed, it begins to eat away at the very bed and banks it flows over. Scientists call this phenomenon sediment starvation, or hungry water, and it is creating an entirely new cycle of erosion no one planned for. This means even when dams release adequate water, the riverbed is sinking, reducing the ability of farmers to draw irrigation water from the river. This is a perfect example of what engineers call unintended consequences, when a well-intentioned intervention in one place creates more complex problems somewhere else. Not everything happening here is linear or predictable. The Mekong is producing surprises that even the most sophisticated computer models have consistently failed to forecast. One of those surprises is how fish species are responding to these changes, not in the ways that anyone expected. Some smaller, more agile species are adapting and thriving in the new conditions, filling the niches left vacant by the collapse of larger species. This is what ecologists call ecosystem simplification, when a complex system loses diversity and becomes increasingly fragile and vulnerable. A diverse ecosystem resembles a multi-stranded net. If one strand breaks, the others carry the load. But as diversity falls, as fewer and fewer strands remain, the entire net becomes catastrophically more fragile. This affects not just fish, it cascades through the entire food web, from phytoplankton to waterbirds to the humans who depend on it all. Waterbird populations at Tonle Sap Lake have declined by more than 70% since the 1990s, according to Wildlife Conservation Society data. Those birds form part of an indivisible web. Every decline here pulls at something else there. But perhaps the most shocking finding of all, almost no one anticipated concerns what is changing beneath the riverbed itself, inside the sediment. The Mekong's sediment layer is a world unto itself, harboring trillions of microorganisms performing the chemical reactions that keep the whole system functional. Those microorganisms cycle nutrients, decompose organic matter, and provide the foundation of the entire food chain from the very bottom up. As the sediment structure changes, as fresh silt no longer arrives, that entire microbial community shifts with it. Recent studies indicate this disruption is releasing methane, a potent greenhouse gas, from the disturbed sediment layers at the river's floor. This means the disruption of the Mekong's ecosystem may not only affect fish and agriculture, it may actively contribute to the very climate problem that is accelerating it. This is a feedback loop at planetary scale, not a local problem belonging to 6 riparian nations alone. But of everything happening to the Mekong, perhaps the most complex truth is that the boundary between natural disaster and human-caused harm has become almost impossible to draw. Extreme floods are increasing not because of more rainfall, but because dams release water suddenly at moments that no longer align with the natural seasonal cycle. Extreme droughts are worsening not because of less rainfall, but because dams retain water precisely when the dry season communities need it most. Farmers in the Delta are facing both extremes simultaneously in the same season, on the same land. This is a new kind of instability, one that no traditional agricultural system was ever designed to withstand. When farming fails and incomes collapse, people leave, generating the largest rural-to-urban migration in the Mekong Delta's modern history. More than 1 million people have left the Mekong Delta in the past 10 years, the majority heading toward Ho Chi Minh City. And here is where the story begins to turn, because amid everything being lost, there are things being rediscovered. Traditional fishing communities along the Mekong have preserved ecological knowledge across hundreds of years, knowledge that modern science has only just begun to document. Lao fishermen near Cone Falls can read the river's level to within a single day, simply by looking at the water's color and smelling its surface. That knowledge, passed through generations without ever being written, is an informal, ecological monitoring system no instrument can replace. Remarkably, when scientists begin integrating that traditional knowledge into ecological models, the accuracy of those models improves substantially. In Thailand, riverside communities have established self-governed fish conservation zones where seasonal fishing bans apply and fish populations have begun to recover. Those conservation zones require no large government budget. They require trust, commitment, and a genuine understanding of how ecosystems actually function. In Vietnam, some delta farmers are transitioning to combined rice and shrimp farming, adapting to salinity rather than fighting it. Rather than treating saltwater intrusion as an enemy, they work with it as a new condition, and many of their incomes have risen as a result. This is what ecologists call ecosystem-based adaptation, and it is proving effective in far more places than most people realize. But those small solutions, important as they are, cannot alone address the fundamental challenge: transboundary water governance. The river knows no national borders, but the decisions that govern it are divided among 6 entirely separate state apparatuses with conflicting interests. China, which has built the most dams, is not a full member of the Mekong River Commission, and is bound by no mandatory data-sharing agreements. Downstream nations like Vietnam and Cambodia bear consequences of decisions in which they had no meaningful voice. This is one of the 21st century's most complex geopolitical challenges, and it is unfolding in relative silence at the level of global media. Its importance cannot be overstated. What happens on the Mekong will become the template for transboundary water disputes everywhere on Earth. Researchers estimate that by 2050, more than 5 billion people will live in river basins whose water is shared with at least one neighboring nation. The Mekong, with its history of both conflict and cooperation, is the world's living laboratory for learning how to navigate those challenges. And at the heart of all of this is this: the river does not wait for us to finish our political arguments. It is changing right now, day by day, season by season, in ways that, once set in motion, are extraordinarily difficult to reverse. Earth's history shows that ecosystems can recover, but only when humans create the conditions for them to do so, and only while time still remains. Think again of that river, wider than 15 city boulevards, the one we stood beside at the beginning of this story. It has flowed through this place for 40 million years, witnessing mass extinctions, ice ages, and the entire evolution of our species. It does not depend on humans to exist, but 60 million humans depend entirely on it. And between that dependence and that change lie choices that our generation is making right now, whether we acknowledge them or not. Every dam built is a choice. Every conservation zone established is a choice. Every season a farmer successfully adapts is a choice made real. The Mekong is a mirror, reflecting back with perfect accuracy the priorities and values of the 6 nations that share it. And that river, wider than 15 boulevards, older than memory itself, is still flowing, still changing, still waiting to see what we will choose.